In one singular, screaming heartbeat, the laws of physics buckled. Millions of people simply evaporated, leaving behind nothing but empty shoes, wedding rings, and a world falling into a collective trauma. They told you it was a glitch, a solar flare, a scientific anomaly, but the warnings were carved into parchment thousands of years ago. As the smoke rises like a perverted incense over our burning cities, a new architect is stepping out of the shadows. He doesn't come with an iron fist, but with a digital leash and a velvet promise of peace. From the cockpit of a pilot who lost everything to the blood-stained boardrooms of the global elite, the Great Reset has begun. With God, all things are possible. Matthew 19:26. For a lifetime I carried that verse like a polished stone in my pocket, familiar, comforting, and largely untested. But 6 months ago, the impossible shifted from a Sunday school promise to a terrifying global trauma. The definition of reality was rewritten in the time it takes to blink. Walk through a park today, and you will see the inventory of our collective grief. A child's empty shoes sit abandoned in a sun-drenched playground, the laces still tied, the socks still tucked inside, as if the spirit simply stepped out of the flesh and through the sky. In the aftermath of this, the single most catastrophic event in human history, we are drowning in cleanup efforts and starving for answers. Security forces pace our streets to stem the tide of worldwide violence. Yet the greatest wound isn't the chaos, it's the silence where our loved ones used to be. The world's leaders call this an unforeseen anomaly. The president speaks of conspiracy theories and warns against those who suggest God had a hand in the harvest. They claim there was no warning, yet the blueprints of our destruction have been sitting on our bookshelves for centuries. While the world wrings its hands in the soot of its own burning cities, there are men who do not weep. They calculate. Jonathan Stonegal is a man who knows that in the kingdom of the blind, the man with the master key is king. From his glass sanctuary high above the frantic streets, he watches the world fracture. He has no patience for the bean counters, those small-minded men who fret over quarterly losses, while the very fabric of reality is being rewoven. Stonegal has spent a lifetime turning hundreds into billions, but his ultimate currency is influence. He birthed Eden, a social media leviathan that has swallowed every newsroom and broadcasting tower on the map. If it didn't happen on Eden, it didn't happen at all. He controls the lens through which the survivors view their own trauma, filtering truth until it fits his design. But the ledger reveals a strange obsession. $400 million funneled into the Middle East, not for food or medicine, but for a temple, a monument of stone and gold rising from the dust. His associates tremble at the risk, but Stonegal only smiles with the cold clarity of a predator. He isn't building for today. He is building a stage for a world that has finally lost its soul. When the salt of the earth departed, the rot set in with a speed that defied every social contract we once held sacred. In just 6 months, the thin veil of civilization has shredded. Murders have surged by 300%. Suicides, driven by a despair that no medication can touch, have soared by a staggering 1,000%. It is a landslide of human wreckage. Dr. Ruby Kincaid now stands before the microphones, labeling this psychological collapse not as a spiritual reckoning, but as a pandemic of evil. To the halls of power, the danger isn't the void left behind by the missing, but the misinformation of those who still look to the heavens. The president himself has decried the truth as a lethal conspiracy theory, a contagion that must be quarantined. In the flickering light of a television screen in a dark, abandoned hospital hallway, the message is clear. Truth is the new virus. If they can brand your faith as a sickness, they can justify any cure. Rayford Steele was once the picture of steady-handed competence, a captain of a transatlantic vessel carving paths through the sky. To those who knew his spirit, he was a man drifting in a different kind of vacuum. His wife, Irene, had spent years trying to tether him to the bedrock of faith. But Rayford's heart was fashioned from harder stone. When she finally managed to drag him into a pew, he wasn't listening for the voice of the Creator. He was scrolling through sports news on his phone, bowing his head only so people would mistake his apathy for prayer. Irene had warned him of the rapture with a certainty that Rayford found almost embarrassing. A dusty book fantasy that had no place in his cockpit. At 30,000 feet, the screaming silence of the cabin told him everything his pride had denied. There was a sudden hiss of cabin pressure, a collective gasp of a world being halved, and then the terrifying absence. Rayford looked back into a cabin littered with heaps of fabric and cold jewelry. A wedding ring sat alone on a passenger seat, nestled in the folds of a sweater that no longer held a body. In that freezing altitude, the truth finally caught up to him. He had spent his life navigating by the stars, yet he was utterly lost. He had read every headline except the one that mattered, leading him straight to the doorstep of a church he never thought he'd visit as a believer. In the hollow silence of New Hope Church, the air tastes of dust and discarded prayers. Rayford sat in a pew that had once been his wife's sanctuary, staring at a flickering television. On the screen was the face of Pastor Bruce Barnes, a man who had stood behind the pulpit for a decade, but had never stepped into the light. He was still here, a shepherd who had forgotten the shepherd, now forced to lead the flock of the forsaken. The video was a confession and a roadmap. Bruce's voice, thick with the weight of his own failure, spoke of things the world now called conspiracy, but the Bible called prophecy. "We have entered the 7-year period of darkness," the video pleaded. "This is the tribulation, the era of the Great Reset, where terror will wear the mask of peace." There, in that dim sanctuary, a small circle formed. Rayford, his daughter Chloe, and Bruce. Together, they became a nucleus of resistance against the rising digital tide, turning the yellowed pages of the scriptures to find the blueprints for surviving the coming reset. When the world fractured, the architects didn't bring glue. They brought a cage. We were told the vanishings were a glitch in the universe, an anomaly that the UN Vanishing Accountability Project would solve with the cold, sterile light of science. They gave us Dominator Analytics and Joshua Todd Cothran's algorithms. These tools whispered of a second wave, a manufactured terror designed to make a broken public beg for a leash. This fear became the foundation of the Great Reset. Under the banner of peace and unity, the old world was dismantled. The dollar, the pound, the yen, gone, replaced by the digital ghost of Eden Pay, a system marketed as a miracle of convenience by Dr. Chaim Rosenzweig. Imagine a mother trying to buy milk for a crying child. She swipes her card, but the screen flashes red. Her social stability score has dipped because she attended an unauthorized prayer meeting. The transaction is blocked. This is the reality of Eden Pay. It is not merely a currency, it is a total surrender. A system of surveillance that breathes with you, reporting your location and your heartbeat to a central mind. total social credit, total compliance. The architecture is complete, and the doors are locking from the outside. What happens to a man's soul when he cannot buy bread or sell his labor without the digital mark of the architect? When the sky turns black and the stomach screams, the price of survival becomes the soul itself. Buck Williams, a man who lived by the cold logic of a lead story, began to see the stitching in the shroud being draped over the world. Beneath the chaos, he saw how the Eden platform, with its 6 billion users, had become a digital census of a broken planet. As Buck's fingers danced across the keys, he found the encrypted marrow of the second wave plot. It wasn't an atmospheric prediction. It was a psychological operation. People don't fight for liberty when they are waiting for the sky to fall again. The Great Reset was merely branding for a velvet glove covering an iron fist. Under the guise of solving a crisis, the elite were building a cage for the entire human race. Nature abhors a vacuum, and the spirit of man, hollowed out by grief, is the most dangerous void of all. Into this echoing silence, a new light has begun to flicker on the horizon of the east. He does not come with the iron fist of a tyrant, but with the velvet touch of a healer. His name is Nicolae Carpathia. Until yesterday, he was a mere footnote in the politics of Romania. Today, he is the name on every trembling lip. At the United Nations, a place long paralyzed by its own impotence, his rise has been nothing short of miraculous, meteoric, effortless, and terrifyingly graceful. He stands in the spotlight of a world gone dark, a man of such blinding charisma that he seems to radiate a peace the earth has forgotten. He speaks, and the screaming of the masses hushes to a whisper. He promises a world without borders, a world where the belly of no child is empty. To a public desperate to be told that the nightmare is over, he is the rising star. But look closer. Is he the savior the world has been crying for? Or is he the very monster the dusty old book warned us would come dressed in light? The shifting sands of the Middle East have birthed a miracle of gold and stone to welcome him. Jonathan Stonagle's $400 million vision is now a physical reality. A sprawling altar where the disparate faiths of a broken earth are invited to bleed into one. In the velvet-lined silence of the UN Security Council, 10 men sit around a heavy mahogany table, believing they hold the reins of a runaway world. These are the 10 kings of a new era. At the head sits Stonagle, surveying the room with the arrogance of a man who believes he has purchased even the divine. He looks at Carpathia with a patronizing smirk, believing he owns the man, believing he has funded a god. But Carpathia sits in a shroud of eerie stillness. He is a mirror reflecting back whatever they wish to see. Yet behind that charismatic mask, something ancient and lethal is coiled. Power has a specific gravity. Stonagle believed he was the center, the architect who had bought the media and tethered the global economy to his digital leash. He was wrong. A master may pull the strings of a puppet, but he is foolish to try and pull the strings of a storm. The UN Security Council meeting was supposed to be the coronation of their alliance, but as the room fell into a preternatural hush, the theater of peace dissolved into a ritual of blood. It was a staged assassination attempt, a choreographed execution. Stonagle didn't even have time to understand that his protege had outgrown him. With a coldness that defied human biology, Carpathia did not just command the violence, he executed it. With his own hands, he silenced the men who thought they owned him. In that moment, the blood on Carpathia's palms wasn't a stain. It was an inauguration. As he reached out to adjust his silk tie in the mirror, the magnetic warmth had frozen into a terrifying, ancient void. This was the Judas kiss of the modern age. The architect had been sacrificed to make way for the inheritor. The world was no longer in the hands of a greedy billionaire. It was now in the grip of the one the prophets had wept over. The digital temple that Stoneagle built has a new master. Every screen in your home, every device in your hand, is now a pulpit for a man who washed his hands in blood and called it a baptism of peace. Buck Williams, realizing the window was closing, scrambled to broadcast one final truth. The global infrastructure of GWN was falling under total dominion. Carpathia is not the savior the UN promised. He is the architect of a lie so vast it swallows the sun. Stoneagle and Cawthron were slaughtered to clear a path for the man who now demands biometric submission through Eden Pay. The vanishings were not a tragedy of physics. They were a triumph of prophecy. What you witnessed 6 months ago was the bride being called home. Now, the earth belongs to the tribulation. Carpathia will track your pulse, your spending, and your soul. But he cannot track a heart that has already been surrendered. The digital iron curtain is dropping. The static is rising. But the word remains. They can cut the feed, but they cannot erase the truth that was written in blood long before this world began. Do not accept their reset. Do not believe their peace. The digital curtain has fallen, and the world now wakes to a morning that will last 7 years. Across the globe, screens have gone dark. But in the silence, the sound of pages turning grows louder. In the shadows of a world that has traded its soul for a biometric promise, a small flame has been struck. Rayford, Chloe, and Bruce, the Tribulation Force, are more than a resistance. They are the keepers of the light in an age of absolute midnight. Looking out from the windows of New Hope Church, the horizon no longer promises a dawn. The sky belongs to Carpathia. The airwaves belong to Eden. The very bread of the earth now carries the price of a digital mark. But as these few gather around a flickering lamp, their purpose has crystallized. They are a rescue operation for the eternal. Every soul left behind is a prize in the ultimate war. They know the path ahead is paved with fire. They know the scriptures have already penned the cost: martyrdom, hunger, and a darkness that can be felt. Yet in that cold room, a profound peace settles. The dusty book isn't dusty anymore. It is alive, pulsing like a heartbeat. The impossible has already happened, and the unthinkable is yet to come. The storm has arrived, and the 7 years of terror have begun. Standing against the rising star is the only light that cannot be extinguished, following the ancient path that leads through the fire and into the only kingdom that will never fall. The clocks of men have stopped, but the timing of the Almighty is perfect.